Doctors of Reddit, what's the biggest case of faking it you've ever seen? Taking trauma call during surgery residency, had a prisoner come in after a fight and claimed he couldn't move or feel his legs. All the court scans and MRIs were normal, but we would shield his legs so he couldn't see them and poke them with needles and other sharp objects with enough force to cause pain. He never flinched or moved his legs at all. He was diagnosed with SIWARA, spinal cord injury without radiographic abnormality. He stayed in the hospital for a week, no improvement. Always had one guard with him. One night they were down in the lobby watching some television, but the guard needed to use the restroom. The patient said, "Where could I possibly go? I'm paralyzed." Guard left him alone for 2 minutes. Patient last seen sprinting down the road, naked butt cheeks flapping in the breeze. Made it to a city 4 hours away by car, before he was caught again. I have never seen anyone fake it so well. Truly playing the long con. Dermatologist here. Patient was convinced she had a melanoma and needed a biopsy and would need to be on workers' comp. I told her it looked like ink from a marker. She demanded a biopsy. I wiped the area off with an alcohol swab and showed her the ink and that there was no spot on her skin anymore. She stormed out threatening to sue. I'm just glad I cured her melanoma. Had a patient come in for a fall who now couldn't move their legs at all. Did a bunch of tests, didn't find anything. The patient was not at all fazed by suddenly being paralyzed, which was the first red flag. Didn't really believe anything was wrong, but the patient was still not moving their legs. My options are to admit for a huge workup or get them to walk. So I update them saying everything is fine, tests are negative, you can go home. Patient gets up, gets dressed and walks out without a word. We had a patient faking a seizure, so my supervisor told one of us to get the brain needle. The patient made a miraculous and swift recovery without intervention. Not a doctor, but worked in healthcare for nearly 20 years. While taking a break from the ICU, due to it being emotionally draining, I worked in home health for a bit. I had a patient who clearly had Munchausen syndrome. On a daily basis she would call her insurance to see what things would be covered if she was diagnosed with this or that. She called her doctor's office an average of 5x during my shift with her. She would report all kinds of non-real symptoms. She pestered the doctors in to do exploitive laparoscopic surgery. Of course nothing was found. One day I walked in and she was rubbing her incisions with rotten cabbage trying to get it infected. She wasn't seeking pain meds, except to sell. Really, she was just as happy with antibiotics or stool softeners, anything, as long as they wrote her a prescription, and she got to go to the pharmacy, where she did a whole song and dance for them too, claiming allergies and reactions. She always increased the exaggeration of her story too. One time she fluttered her eyes, after making sure I was looking, and said she lost consciousness in that half a second. She called the doctor and claimed she lost consciousness for 5 minutes. She called the insurance and claimed it was 10 minutes. She called the pharmacy and claimed it was 30 minutes. Then she called 911 and told them she woke up on the floor after losing consciousness for 4 hours. The worst thing about her was she was a mom. Her son was 28 at the time, and by all the stories of his childhood illnesses and all her saying how he is severely disabled, I knew she basically fucked up his childhood with Munchausen by proxy. She portrayed him as being severely disabled and that's why he would never find a wife. I met him. He was healthy and of average intelligence. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was gay, but she refused to accept that. Working with her was so miserable that I took a couple years off from any and all healthcare after that. Young, 18 to 20, woman went running into small rural hospital pretending to have abdominal pain. Police officer had tagged her going 40+ km over the limit, which was "stunt driving" as per the new law in Ontario, impounded license suspension automatic. Cop followed her into her and apparently said he'd be waiting for her when she left. Locum staff such as myself were housed at a small B&B about 15 minutes away, and the air had pre-printed order sets to be done before we arrived. When I arrived she flat out admitted that she just came in because she freaked out and didn't stop. I told her we'd give her 45 minutes to call her parents/family before I booted her. Except, BHCG came back positive, and subsequent ultrasound came back showing extremely early ectopic. Officer figures out something is up when he hears air ambulance call coming over radio. She was completely asymptomatic and just worked out that she dodged both charges and a life-threatening issue by accident. It was definitely a WTF moment. Edit. Well, this blew up overnight. I got a few messages. A little more info. Small rural hospitals in northern Ontario often service areas from more than an hour's drive away and still only have a catchment area of 2,000 to 3,000 people. When on call it was just that. We would do our days in the community clinic, then maybe hospital rounds, then go home and be on call. We wouldn't be at the hospital. There wasn't an on-call room where you would stay, for example. There were lots of times that you'd go a full night without being woken up, or maybe just a call from the acute care inpatient wing. Locums were short-term contracts for places that didn't have full-time medical staff for whatever reason. It's hard to attract clinicians if you don't even have broadband internet in the community. They generally pay very well. My brother was an EMT for 2 years, and he told me this. People will try to use the ambulance as a means for transportation from Fulton to Oswego because the hospital is in Oswego by faking seizures. Sometimes when the head EMT guy was feeling fun and knew that the person was faking, he'd say something like, "Man, it's weird that he's having seizures, but not peeing himself." Apparently the person would kind of snap out of it for a second, weigh up the repercussions, then either pee themselves or stop faking. I thought that was hilarious. Had a patient when I was an intern feigning blindness. She would constantly be playing on her smartphone, only furiously trying to hide it when someone from the care team came into her room. The best was when my attending one day strolled past her room and threw his hand up in a highly exaggerated hello wave. She started to throw her arm up too, but caught herself halfway through, then threw her hand back into her lap and pretended to be staring off into nothing. One time my roommate, who is an IQ nurse, came to see one of my indoor soccer games. During the game a player on the other team went down hurt and starting screaming in pain and swearing and rolling around while holding his ankle before he was eventually helped off the field. He then limped over to where the fans sat and watched the rest of the game brooding in silence before he left early. After the game my roommate told me he was going to go over and see if there was anything he could do to help until he saw that the guy was limping on the wrong leg. Not a doctor, but am a UK-based midwife. Had a patient who had been in and out of hospital throughout her pregnancy with episodes of heavy bleeding. This was her 6th baby, so she was a fairly well-known patient in our unit. The issue was no one had ever seen her actively bleeding. She'd call saying that she had bled down the toilet but flushed it, and all the examinations we did came back completely normal with mostly no evidence of any bleed whatsoever. On occasions during speculum examinations we'd see the smallest amount of blood. I was caring for her during a shift where she yet again called to say she was bleeding, walked into her room, and found her jabbing around her vagina with a sharp object to make herself bleed. She had been doing it the entire pregnancy. The reason she gave, because she had 5 noisy children at home, needed some rest, and knew we wouldn't admit her to hospital if it wasn't for a good reason. She would do it anytime her being discharged home was mentioned. We ended up having to complete a perinatal mental health referral and consult with the safeguarding midwives as she was putting herself and baby at risk of serious harm. Edit. So this got a lot more attention than I ever expected. There's a lot of questions regarding birth control and questioning her parenting, so thought it best to add an edit. This patient was not by any means a benefits seeker. They were a hard-working and loving family that had full-time jobs. She had been booked in to have her tubes tied, but found out a week before the procedure that she was pregnant with this baby. She just couldn't cope during the pregnancy and became very mentally unwell. She did not realize the implications or understand the face that she was causing massive harm to herself and her baby. She was referred to our perinatal mental health team and treated for psychosis. They also had a lot of input after she had her baby. She ended up having a C-section and was sterilized at the same time at her request. By all accounts she is doing very well now. Hey guys, please remember to like and subscribe, it really helps my video out in the YouTube algorithm. Post by August. Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing and liking, it really helps this video out in the YouTube algorithm.